baby steps. I think many of us have heard that phrase before, or that term before. It refers to dealing with this and things in little chunks rather than trying to take the whole thing at once, or taking small steps rather than one big giant leap, right? It's helpful. It's a way that we often deal with some of our challenges through life. I did my undergraduate degree in engineering. And one of the things they teach you throughout engineering is how to take these large, sometimes giant, complex problems and deal with them by breaking it apart into small, little bitty problems, right? Tinier problems. And when you have these small bite-sized problems, individually, they're easier to deal with than this large thing that sometimes is hard to kind of wrap your arms around. So they teach you that, you break it apart and you start working at these smaller problems, and before you know it, you'll have made progress on your larger issue. Baby steps. But there's a trick here, of course, right? You can probably see this is it's easy to say that we're going to take a large problem and chunk it up into smaller bits, but the magic is understanding how to do exactly that. Sometimes these problems are just so large and vast. The trick of understanding, where am I supposed to break this apart? What are the smaller steps supposed to look like? That, of course, is an art as much as it is a science, but it is difficult. And the thing that even makes it even more difficult is because what we're trying to do is we're trying to take something inherently complex and make it simple. But the idea of simplicity, if I dig into that a little bit, simple is subjective. Consider this. I'm holding in one of my hands a teddy bear. I'm holding in the other one of my hands a circuit board. One of these things is mine. I won't tell you which one. The other belongs to somebody else. So look at this and ask yourselves, which one of these is simpler? I mean, if I were asked to describe, or let's say if I were asked to come up with a document, write a document that describes these things that I'm holding in my hands, the teddy bear and the circuit board, and that description needed to be complete enough that one could replicate it or even describe what it does, its purpose, and everything about it, well, honestly, I'd have a tough time writing a document for this teddy bear. I'd have to make some bullet form points like, it's cute, it's soft, it's fuzzy, it's cuddly, it provides warmth and comfort and happiness and all that. But if I handed this, or if I assigned that tasks to a number of us, I think many of us would come up with different descriptions of what this teddy bear, what its purpose was and what it could do. So in some ways, that's a way to describe this teddy bear. If on the other hand, I had to make a document for this circuit board, well, it would probably be a much longer document, first of all, but I would argue that every single component on this little tiny board has a function, and each and every one of those functions can be very specifically described and accurately described. Not only that, I can describe with a high degree of accuracy the connections that occur on this board and what every single purpose of every single thing was. So although it would be a bigger document, I would argue it's a simpler document. I mean, even if I went to the extent of being asked to draw these things, me personally, I'd have a much harder time drawing this than I would this. Some of you may agree with me. Others are probably like, you're crazy. The teddy bear is definitely simpler. And I'm not saying one of you're right or wrong, but the point I'm trying to make is that simplicity is subjective, and not every single one of us shares the same concept of simple. In my profession, one of the things that I do is I support government transportation authorities to manage the digital representation of their transportation networks. So some of you may refer to that as a digital twin. That's perfectly fine. It's often known that way. But what it really is, it's some way to describe all of the transportation infrastructure that you and I use every day. The roads that we drive our cars on, the bicycle paths that we cycle on, the nature paths in the parks that we walk on, the rail that our light rail systems use for public transit or subways. All of those things constitute the infrastructure. And within an urban environment, they could be plenty of those types of infrastructure. And the digital representation of that infrastructure is something that government transportation authorities need to own and manage, so that they can deal and manage with that infrastructure. And it's one of the things that I do is I help create or manage that type of digital representation. And I think regardless as to how you look at it, it most certainly is complex. Right? There's really very little easy ways to describe this, right? But inherently it's a complex business. But the other thing that makes it complex is that there's not really one single way to do it. Different cities or different jurisdictions, different provinces, they all do it a little bit differently. And so as a result, there's lots of different ways to describe that data. I'm going to describe one of the more common ways that we describe these digital representations. Now, I'm going to get a little bit technical, okay? So just hang on there for a little while I get into this. Imagine a road network, an urban road network. And that road network, for the most of our cities are kind of laid out in grids. And so you can imagine that we have roads that are separated or split by intersections. So we have intersections all around our city, and we have little segments of road that go between those intersections. So imagine you went out to every single one of those road segments and placed down a large bucket. And on that bucket, you put a label on it, and a unique label. So every single bucket had its own unique label. And then we went ahead and started filling the buckets with descriptions of that specific segment of road. So for example, I would say that this particular segment of road has 2 lanes on it. So it's got 2 lanes. I'm going to put that into the bucket. This same section of road has a poor surface conditions. I'm going to put that into the bucket. This same section of road has a 50 kilometer an hour speed limit. I'm going to put that into the bucket. I could keep going. There's so many ways to describe pieces of roads in terms of rules and conditions and governance and all that sort of stuff that will allow me to really fill that bucket to the brim of information about that road segment. And if I did that for all of the different road segments in my road network, I'd end up with a digital representation of my entire transportation network. And quite frankly, that's how it's done quite often in many Canadian municipalities. They do exactly that. They have unique buckets and they fill those buckets with descriptions of that road segment. But that's not the only way it's done. Let me describe an alternative way. Rather than putting buckets on my roads, I'm going to go back to City Hall. And in City Hall, I'm going to build a bookshelf, a really big bookshelf, let's say. Now, I know that every street in my network has a name, right? Whether it's King Street, Queen Street, whatever. Every single street in your jurisdiction probably has names. So I know that there's a name for each and every one of them. And I'm going to put a shelf down on my bookshelf, the very first shelf. And I'm going to declare that this shelf that I'm placing on my bookshelf is the lane shelf. Then I'm going to say on that shelf, on King Street, let's say, from the beginning to the second intersection, it's 2 lanes. And then from the second intersection to the third intersection, it's 3 lanes. And then from the third intersection all the way to the end of King Street, it's 2 lanes again. That's my lane shelf. Then I'm going to add another shelf on top of that. And I'm going to say from all of King Street, from the beginning to the end, it's 50 kilometers an hour speed limit. That piece of data goes onto my speed limit shelf. I'm going to add another shelf on top of that, and that shelf is going to be my condition shelf. And I'm going to say for the first 500 meters of King Street, it's in good condition. For the next 10 meters, it's in bad condition. And for the remainder of King Street, it's actually in good condition again. That's my condition shelf. And I'm going to keep going, adding shelves and referencing locations on my network to describe that particular shelf that I'm sitting at. That's another way to describe a transportation network or a digital description of a transportation network. They're different, but which one is simple and which one is complex? The answer could vary depending on who you are. Some of you may think the bucket method is simple. Some of you may think the bookshelf method is simple. Well, there really isn't a right answer here, but one of the things I would like you to ask yourself is, the answer that you gave, whichever one you thought was simple, which one of those methods is familiar? And if you're in the business, you'll have an answer for that. If you're not in the business, you probably don't have an answer for that, and that's okay. But the point I'm making here is that sometimes folks mistake simple for familiar. Therefore, simplicity equals familiarity. And that can be a dangerous place to be if you want to evolve your road network. So I'm sure some of you have formed an opinion about which one is simpler and which is complex, but I'm sure many of you are probably like, I don't understand any of that, Arif. All of this just went right over my head, and none of it actually makes sense to me. The only thing that's important to me is that I just want it to work. And that is the key. Because why are we spending all this time to design these digital representations of our transportation network, if the people who need to use it can't even make sense of it? And see, That's part of the struggle here, is that it is complex, like I said before, undoubtedly complex. And so for the people who manage it, we certainly want to make it simpler for them. But the real reason is that we want to be able for the people who are not experts to be able to participate in this environment and use that data for all of their business needs. Because let's face it, road management, not everyone understands and not everyone will understand. And that's okay, because it is complex. But we can devise our systems and our representations so that all of these people who are not experts about the way data management is done can still participate and still communicate and still contribute to and consume all this data for all of their downstream businesses. Isn't that the point? I mean, in the end, we certainly want to find a simpler way to manage these digital representations at scale for large, evolving transportation systems. But we also, more importantly, want a way so that everyone can participate in a common, unified transportation network that serves us all. And that is what me and my team are interested in doing. My name is Arif Rafiq. I'm the Transportation Industry Manager with Esri Canada, and me and my team are here to help Canadian organizations evolve the way we manage our transportation systems.